While working on my previous video regarding Pikmin and doing some research, a thought came into my mind. Pikmin is classified as a real-time strategy game, or RTS, which at first glance seems a bit odd. Real-time strategy games, for those unfamiliar, are usually associated with games like StarCraft and Warcraft that have players build up a base and army in real time to compete against AI or other players. And it makes sense that Pikmin is a real-time strategy game. After all, you build an army with resources in real time, but for some reason it seems a bit different than the others listed. And perhaps this is by design, as Nintendo often does things out of the box in terms of genres. Which leads me to the topic of today's adventure. What goes into the design process of making a Nintendo game? And to add some fun to this, I'm going to create and pitch a new Nintendo-style game myself, using what we learn. So first off, I want to focus on Nintendo's approach to genres. Nintendo loves to approach standard genre guidelines and rules as suggestions rather than strict guidelines, meaning that Nintendo takes what works with those respective game styles and strips away the aspects deemed unnecessary. What if we had a fighting game not based on a health pool, which results in Smash Brothers? What if we create a platformer where the main character cannot die, leading to Yoshi's Island? And even what if we had a shooter like Splatoon where the objective isn't to decimate your foes? Many Nintendo games take an established genre formula and removes or tweaks some of the main pillars of what makes that genre unique. Using Pikmin as an example again, they use the real-time movement, army building, different unit types commonly found in RTS games, but gets rid of a few of the complicated aspects. While resource management is still there, it is primarily tied to combat, meaning that the player's sole focus can be on exploring and fighting rather than constantly min-maxing troops to gain some energy. Unit types are broken into a few relatively balanced types of units, with clear-cut strengths and weaknesses instead of a complex wave of unit relationships. And combat is more forgiving, being focused around striking specific points rather than having enough of a certain type of units or specific counters, setups, or abilities. These changes make Pikmin feel less like an RTS and more like its own style, despite still being classified as an RTS. And, as mentioned, RTS is not the only genre Nintendo has done this with. Splatoon, while still being a shooter, is based on covering the floors with paint instead of killing enemies. The paint on the floor is used for movement and reloading, meaning that every core mechanic in the game is intrinsically designed around the idea of shooting as much paint as possible. This is another main aspect of Nintendo game design, where the central mechanic dictates the surrounding aspects, as if the entire game is built to support a single idea. It makes a more approachable game, as everything will always tie back to the core mechanic. No matter what the situation or question somebody has about how to play Splatoon, chances are it revolves around putting down paint. Every weapon, tool, and ability is meant to push that one central theme to make it easier to understand for everybody, as opposed to having a long list of unrelated game mechanics. The Mario and Luigi series is another good example of how to design around a central mechanic. The games all revolve around the brothers having a single button for their inputs. A is for Mario, and B is for Luigi. If you want to jump, use a hammer, use item, or even dodge attacks, you use their corresponding button. Everything that character does is tied to that one single button, and never any other button. So getting back to the central premise of this video, I think I have laid out a few requirements to make a Nintendo-esque game. It has to use aspects of a genre to reinforce its main idea, and remove the ones that hinder it. And it also revolves around one central core mechanic that ties the game together. From this point onward, I will be trying to pitch a game in that vein for fun. This isn't going to be an in-depth analysis from this point, just a fun exercise in my own creativity. I wanted to pick a genre that Nintendo has not really touched too frequently in the past, which didn't leave me a ton of options. Making video games for around 30 years means that the company has dipped their toes in just about every avenue of gaming, so I did identify a few that I could use. Card games would be an option, but I'm not up to the challenge of designing an entire set of rules for a card game. Horror or survival horror is another, though Luigi's Mansion already somewhat fills that role. Puzzle games are another option, but there aren't really a good standard genre rules for those. Ultimately, there's only one that truly stood out to me as a good exercise, that being the stealth genre. So what aspects define a stealth game? Well, I believe I came up with 3. 1. You want to remain unseen. 2. If seen, you are powerless or at least weaker against enemies. And 3. Mechanics and gadgets are used to keep us hidden. So using those as a guideline, I know that of the stealth games I've played in the past, that the first option is annoying to experience, as long thought out plans and actions can be ruined by a guard catching you in a split second. So how would I avoid that in a game? Well, what if we inverted it where the goal of the game is to be seen by your prey and instead of hiding from them? This led me to believe what kind of theme would fit that, and my mind quickly went to the idea of a fly. Flies are annoying when they're in your vision zooming around, so what if the player was a fly trying to annoy the AI? This led me to some brainstorming, but ultimately I didn't like the idea of flight in this inverse stealth game. I wanted a central mechanic that was stronger than just flying, so I came up with what I believe a better solution is: a centipede. I wanted a bug that was annoying and on the ground, but I didn't want to use spiders since, well, frankly, I don't like spiders and they feel overdone. So I picked a centipede. So the main game revolves around you as a centipede crawling around furniture and objects in an attempt to be seen by the human inhabitants of the house. Though, admittedly, this doesn't sound like a compelling game at the moment. It is lacking a challenge. But what would a fail state look like in a stealth game where you want to be seen? The easy answer is to make it bad whenever you are not being seen, but that seems like too easy of a solution to this problem, and I want to ponder on it for a bit. There has to be a more creative solution. So here's what I came up with. Instead of merely wanting to be seen by the humans, you want to scare them into dropping tasty morsels of food. You, as a mindless bug tends to do, want to eat that food. However, what if being in the open meant that gave time for the humans to fight back? What if the longer you are in the open, the easier it is for the humans to eliminate the pest in their house? The final piece of the puzzle I created, I like the idea of a centipede getting bigger as I eat more food. A small centipede that has not eaten anything might be nimble and elusive, while the one that ate might be slower and not be able to fit into some areas. This leads to some nice dynamic gameplay of, do you want to be big and to get more points and finish the level, or do you want to be small to be quicker and have the ability to hide? This idea, I believe, nicely wraps the whole concept into its nice package as now, like Nintendo games, we have a single central mechanic in which the game is built. The idea of eating intrinsically relates to movement, hiding, and the alertness of the humans. Add in different level designs, human variety where they wield different tools to defeat you, and maybe different types of centipedes, and we've got ourselves a decent package with an interesting enough design. Does this make a great game? Definitely not as I just laid it out. The objective of this exercise was to make a game to realize how many decisions and thought process go into a high quality product. If it took me all I had to come up with a half-baked idea like this, imagine the effort needed to make many video games. It's also fun to realize what goes into a game and know some of the design choices behind it. This isn't me saying that every move Nintendo makes is genius. Quite the opposite looking at some of their online and esport policies. Nor am I saying that non-Nintendo developers don't do this. I'm merely stating that maybe some design choices you didn't understand were placed there for a reason. And perhaps looking through the lens of a design perspective might make you appreciate your favorite game even more. How did I do? Leave me a grade below on my video game pitch if it's something you'd want to play. Also leave your own ideas for games designed in this manner. I'm excited to hear pitches from people way smarter than I am. Until next time, Godspeed.